Greetings, this is Matt Faiello, Technical Marketing Engineer with the Cisco Cloud Networking Compute BU, and we're back with another Intersight Managed Mode Expert Series video. This will be another server profile policy video. Specifically, we'll talk about the firmware policy. And I hope you don't mind. I'm going to actually expand upon that and just talk about firmware operations and Intersight altogether. So a little bit above and beyond just the policy itself. And I hope you're going to be able to learn some things from this video. So with that, let's get started with our normal presentation of a few slides followed by demonstration. Okay, so just a little bit of housekeeping here. I'd like to set the stage for all the server policies. So we have 38 total Intersight infrastructure service server policies. Okay, so that encompasses Intersight Managed Mode as well as standalone C-Series policies. Okay, so of those 38 total server policies, we're focusing for this playlist on the 29 policies that apply to Intersight Managed Mode. The 9 highlighted policies you see here apply to standalone C-Series. A few of them also apply to domain policies for the domain profile. So we're not going to be talking about those in this particular series. And that leaves us with the subject of this video, which is firmware policies, and that can be accessed in infrastructure service down here on policies, and then we filter down our UCS server policies and you see firmware. Okay, so what is the firmware policy? Well, it's a policy that we create such that we can define what firmware we want on the endpoint, the B series blade, the X series compute node. And we're going to use that policy as part of the server profile deployment to push the firmware down to the blade. So in the bigger scope of the UCS world, it's nothing new because we always had that capability with UCS Manager, UCS Central. But kind of the genesis of Intersight and Intersight Managed Mode, we didn't have this capability at the onset. You had to do direct endpoint upgrades. And we'll talk about that as well in this video. But basically pushing the firmware directly from Intersight down to the compute node, one or more. But customers, of course, got used to having a policy, and there's good reason for that, and we'll discuss that as well. So now we have the policy to deploy the firmware down. So the policy affords automatic download from Cisco Intersight. Okay. And that policy then allows, when you create the policy, it allows a filtered list. So it's very easy to pick. You don't have to worry about getting the wrong firmware, okay, based on the endpoint type. Okay, so you see a filtered list according to what server PID that you select, and then you select the version that's desired. Okay. It really is good because you push it down. It gets cached into the fabric interconnect, so you're only doing it one time. So if you had 20 chassis, 160 compute nodes, okay, you're pushing the firmware down to the FI the first time, and then thereafter it's being downloaded from the FI. Okay. So it is very much an augment to the existing endpoint upgrade that we've had since the beginning of Intersight with Intersight Managed Mode. And again, we'll talk about some use cases here. It's by and large, history has shown the majority of customers out there prefer to do this policy-based versus endpoint push-based. As with the vast majority of Intersight Managed Mode policies, the firmware policy is not absolutely required in order to get a successful server profile deployment, but it'd be highly recommended. As far as recommendations go, I'm going to cover a lot of this in the demonstration, but there's going to be there is a new numbering scheme Okay. So basically, post 4.23 Charlie infrastructure firmware, B series will take on the new 5.x scheme of numbering, akin to what has been there with X series. Okay. Certainly, the release notes are your friend because you're going to have the proper compatibility matrices in there that you absolutely want to consult. So we'll take a look at that. As far as recommendations and best practices, you're probably going to want to use a policy because policy affords standardization. It's easy to craft the policy, get the policy correct, attach the policy to the template, and then the server profiles downstream of that template are consuming them the same firmware policy, same standards, right? Same push. So it's easier to manage versus the one-off. Um, we have another reference out there that I'll show, and that's the configuration guide, and then also something rather new, but we have a bundle contents guide. So that answers the question. Okay, I deployed my firmware bundle version down. I see a component. Okay, that's not the same numbering. Okay, it won't be. Okay, for instance, the bias version. Okay, is that really part of that bundle? I'd really like some kind of reference to match those two together. Well, that's what this bundle document does, and I'll show you that as well. As far as these links here, I'll go ahead and post these links in the comments section so they're easier to find online. Now, as far as verification steps, once you push the firmware down to the blade, once the blade reboots, you can absolutely see the new inventory take effect in Intersight in the UX. You might have to wait a few minutes for that to update, but then you can also query the API. So I'll show that during the demonstration. Okay, so I wanted to also address, how we manage these cached firmware files on the FI. So every time you download a new firmware, it's getting cached in the FI, and then thereafter, it's being deployed from the FI. That's a great thing, but you're going to have to keep tabs on your boot flash, and I'll show that as well in the demonstration. But there's a manual way that you can secure shell into the FI. You can list the firmware cache out, and then you can basically delete those based on the ID here. And you would have to do that on the A and the B fabric interconnect. And and this is not necessarily the most efficient way to handle this. So we are working on a future way to better manage those files. But they add up. And as you can see on some of the dates here, I've got some really old ones in my lab, fabric interconnects, and you absolutely don't want your boot flash to get overfilled. So you might need to check that out. And we'll show this in the demonstration. And as with all IMM Expert Series videos, I like to show a graphic slide that shows the relationship between the server profile template or server profile and the exact policy we are discussing here. So we can see here that the firmware policy is a direct attached policy to the server profile template or server profile. There's nothing embedded. All right, before we get to the actual firmware policy, which is the primary topic of this video, I do want to spend a little bit of time and just kind of talk about firmware operations in general. Okay, so the firmware policy is newer than the original capability for updating firmware uh, with Intersight, which is more of what I call a direct endpoint upgrade. So remember, for those of you that come from UCS Manager, you had the ability to upgrade the firmware directly through UCS Manager, direct endpoint upgrades, but then you had a policy as well. Well, now we have the same scenario with Intersight Managed Mode with the introduction of the firmware policy. But let's talk about that. Let's talk about that direct endpoint upgrade. So I've got a couple servers here. First and foremost, I can multi-select to upgrade servers. Okay, the only caveat here, okay, is they have to be the same PID. Okay, so for instance, if I select one of my X Series 210 Charlie M6s and I select an M7, let's say I want to do a direct endpoint upgrade, direct firmware upgrade on these two servers. If I come over here to the breadcrumbs on the left, which allows me to do multi-select operations, I'm going to get an error message, okay? Because one of the criteria is the servers have to be the same PID, uh, as opposed to if I select two or more of the same PID, M6, I can go to my breadcrumbs and upgrade the firmware, and I can follow through and upgrade multiple servers. Okay, so just a little caveat there. That generally holds true for all of Intersight as far as where the breadcrumbs are. Notice you have breadcrumbs uh, over here on the far right. That will be for a single server operation. So you can multi-select to your heart's content over here. And if you go to the right, breadcrumbs, and do an upgrade operation or install operating system operation, you're still going to get a single server. If you intend on doing a multi-server type workflow, okay, you have to multi-select and then go to the left breadcrumbs. Okay. As also, I wanted to call out um, if I go in here to my fabric interconnects, okay, and I select my domain, I can see that I'm on the 432 code train. Okay, as far as a bundled version for my fabric interconnect. So let's look at that. If I go over here then to my documentation, okay, I'm going to go to my release notes first, okay, and notice when you're in these release notes, you have a pull down here. So you want to pay attention to that. We're talking about the 4.3 train, not the 4.2 train, okay? You'll see right off the bat, we've got this kind of warning here that, hey, things are going to change. All right. So, in other words, we're doing away with those letter builds with UCS. And I know they've been around since the very beginning. Okay. But that all is changing or has changed. Um, what this is telling you here that post infrastructure firmware release 4.2.3 Charlie, so after this, okay, the server firmware bundle, okay, will be the new version, the new number format, okay, instead of the letter format. So basically, even your B series servers are going to have a 5.x format for the server build. Okay, and that's in alignment with how X series came out to begin with. Okay, so that they'll be on the same sheet of music. Um, and then it says with infrastructure firmware released 432, uh, you're going to have the bundle, okay, have the same number format, okay, versus the letter format. Okay, so we're again doing away with those letter builds, A, B, and C. You know, A was infrastructure, B was Blade, C was FI managed C series. We're doing away with those ABCs, okay, and sticking with a number format. So make sure you pay attention to that. And then if we come down here, probably the most usable thing here in this whole release notes is this cross version support matrix. Okay, so I know if I'm on infrastructure 432, for instance, I know my server firmware for X series, okay, can be 5.0, 5.1, 5.11, and 5.2. Okay, so this helps me align with what I want to upgrade my servers to if I've upgraded my infrastructure. Okay, and of course, X series servers are here. You got C series server firmware in the middle, and then B series down here. Okay, so make sure you pay attention to that. There's also another relatively new document. Okay, and that's we're releasing documentation that shows the content of the builds. Okay, so we had a lot of requests for this. It only makes sense that we have this. We can tell you exactly what the component build number is within the bundled version because those are never going to match up. Okay, bias is always going to be something different. And it's like, okay, if I upload this bundle, what am I installing this bundle? What am I expecting to have on the bias? Okay. So if you launch that documentation, you can see that, uh, again, we're going to have that matrix in there. So that's good. So you can come here and consult the matrix as well, this cross version support matrix. But then if we go down here and keep scrolling down for your particular server model, here I got X Series M6 server, okay, 5.2, okay, which is what I would wish to have on my servers. I can expect a bias version of 432 Charlie. Okay, so if I go to my servers, and let me go here to the servers tab. I know I've already upgraded my second server here, so let me select that guy. Okay, yes, it's 5.2. Okay. By the way, this nomenclature here, 23 is the year, and 40 means it's kind of the internal build number. Okay, so um, not 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 critically important for a customer, but that's the terminology. That's the how we're numbering this. Um, let's go ahead and go over to the inventory here, and you can see that my bias version is in fact 432 Charlie. Okay, so now that we've talked a little bit about the, where to go to find what from a documentation perspective, and again, I'll post those document URLs in a comment section when I upload this video. Let's go back to our servers and let's pick on the first server here. And if I scroll down, I can see that I have a different firmware version, 5.1, and I also have a profile status of out of sync. And I want to kind of explain this scenario here. So what happened here is if I go to my server profile and I see the firmware policy, Bravo 26 firmware. Let's go take a look at that. Let's go down here to policies, and there's Bravo 26 firmware. And I know the contents is here, the settings are there, but let's go ahead and scroll through. I like talking to this screen. You can see that I've actually got more than one server firmware as part of this policy. Okay, I've got X210 Charlie M6 and I got X210 Charlie M7. So I've got both of these firmwares for the different PIDs of servers supported by this one policy. Okay, and you can see both are 5.2. So how did I get into that scenario? Well, there's a couple ways. Perhaps you didn't upgrade, perhaps you didn't activate that server when you push the firmware out with the server profile. Okay, that's one way. And in my scenario here, I back revved. I kind of downgraded the server firmware to to give you a use case here to let you see, okay, that that might be a reason that it's out of sync. In other words, the policy is saying you should be 5.2, but the endpoint's saying I'm on 5.1. Okay, so that would be a reason to do that. So how do you course correct that? Well, you could do it either way. I can do a direct endpoint upgrade to 5.2, okay, or I can simply push out, reassociate, or wrong terminology, redeploy, okay, the server profile with that firmware policy in it that's already pointing to 5.2 and redeploy that down and then activate the server, which you absolutely want to activate the server um, in order for the inventory to kick off and update Intersight. So that is a good way to operate. Which one should you do? A direct endpoint upgrade or a policy based? Well, I think most customers out there are going to want to use the policy, okay? Because again, you can standardize the policy, make sure the policy is correct, attach it to a template, and then if you have your server profiles, derived from that template and you stay bound to it, then you're pretty much guaranteed, that you have uniformity across all your servers. So it's much easier to manage than one-offs. But then the direct endpoint upgrades come in handy a couple different places. First of all, you might be working with a specific server, maybe you're troubleshooting something, and you just want to simply upgrade or downgrade from a more of a maintenance troubleshooting perspective. That is a possible use case. Direct endpoint upgrades also come in handy if brand new hardware comes in. Maybe you don't have your policy model built out yet with server profiles and the firmware policy, et cetera. So you want to just get everything on a standardized latest firmware. Well, go ahead and do direct endpoint upgrades on those servers before you even have your policy model perhaps built out. So a couple plausible scenarios there that you might leverage that. Both capabilities are good. Uh, from a firmware operation standpoint, it's going to be similar. Okay, we're going to download the firmware, especially from SAS. We're going to download the firmware to the Fabric interconnects. It gets cached in the Fabric interconnects. Okay, and then subsequently deployed out to your B series, your X series, or your managed FI managed C series from the Fabric interconnects. Okay, so we're only doing one download operation. It gets cached in the FIs, and then everything's deployed from there. Okay, so now I want to talk a little bit about some Fabric interconnect maintenance. We're pushing this firmware down, and if you don't pay attention on your Fabric interconnect, you can cache those files, build up those files, and we don't want to run out of space on the Fabric interconnect. So if we go to our Fabric interconnects and select A or B, okay, and we go to inventory and then go to local storage, we can see our different partition spaces within the Fabric interconnect. And you'll notice my boot flash here, it's pretty full. I'm 77% full. Okay. So not surprising. This is a lab, and we're constantly pushing different firmwares down and not paying attention maybe to the space, but we should be. But absolutely, you should be paying attention to the space. You probably don't want a bunch of old firmwares in there from a year or two ago. Really, no reason to keep more than a -1 or -2 version of firmware and delete everything else. But again, like everything else, you want to make sure that you're not utilizing that firmware somewhere in the entirety of the UCS domain. So what I'm going to do here is actually bring up my command line. Okay, and I've already secure shelled into that Fabric interconnect, and you can see I got quite a few versions of firmware here that go all the way back to 2021. Now, the command here is list firmware cache dashed out. Okay, and that will get you the running or the cached firmware versions on that specific Fabric interconnect. And then if you want to clear, you do clear dash firmware cache. Okay, and then you need to provide the specific ID. So let's go back and grab this oldest one here, 415 Echo. I need this ID. Okay, now go ahead and execute that, confirm, and that has been erased. So we'll go back and list that again, and that's a 415 Echo. Ah, apologies. And you can see that 415 Echo is gone. We have a 415 Charlie here, but that specific version is gone. Now, if I give this a minute or two, you can see that we're not going to sit here and wait on it, but you give it a few minutes, this is going to adjust, and it's going to go down from 77% to maybe like 72%. Okay, so the key here to understand is this is manual, and you're going to have to do this on FIA as well as FIB. So just because you delete it in one side doesn't mean it automatically gets deleted on the other side. And just a word for the future here, we are going to come up with a much better way to manage this, easier way to manage this cached file scenario on the FIs going forward. But we'll discuss that when that feature is ready to go. All right, so let's finally talk about, let's create a firmware policy to be included with our server profile templates and or server profiles. So here we are in Intersight and Infrastructure Service, Policies, create a policy. I always like to filter down to server policies, and then you see firmware. So select that. Like to give it a meaningful name. Okay, that's just my preference. Bravo 26 identifies my domain. It's a firmware policy. Going to use this on X210 Charlie servers, both M6, M7, and going to have a build number here, 5.2. Okay, just to give me an idea of what this policy is supporting. You can also use your description, use tags. I'm going to select UCS server FI attached, click next. And just a comment on this advanced mode. With the advanced mode here, you can choose to exclude upgrading drives and storage controllers. Honestly, this all stems from a bug years ago from one of our storage vendors that we use in our servers. It was a bad bug. It was causing hard drives to brick. That's why forevermore it's going to be in here. But that was sort of an isolated scenario. It was just kind of a bad scenario. It wasn't Cisco's fault, okay? But we all felt the pain, Cisco as well as customers. So that's the reason in the genesis behind that. Okay. Let's go here and select our correct server types. I'm going to select my M6 version, and I'm definitely going to go 5.2, and then I want to add in the M7 as well. Okay, so that's the beauty of a policy is I can add in different PIDs, right, with different firmwares on one policy attached to one template. Okay, and I can use that mechanism to upgrade a uh, different servers of different PID types, right, from the same policy, same template. So a lot more flexibility here than a direct endpoint firmware upgrade. Okay, so let's pick that version as well, 5.2. Okay, and then click create. All right, so now this policy is here. It's ready to attach to the server profile template or server profile. So that concludes our video today about firmware policies. That's part of our server profile template, server profiles. And I know it's a little longer video today. I know we went above and beyond what exactly firmware policy is, but I hope you were able to pick up a tip here or there in our overall firmware discussion. Um, Stay tuned for more Intersight Managed Mode Expert Series videos, and thanks for hanging in there with me.